The young girl lived in a modest home at the edge of the village, a house that once held warmth and laughter but now echoed with cold commands and cruel laughter. Her mother had passed when she was still very small, leaving her in the care of her father, who remarried a woman whose heart harbored envy and malice. The stepmother, elegant and calculating, immediately set about reshaping the household to favor her own daughter, the girl's stepsister. From that moment, the orphan girl's life became a daily struggle, a life of endless chores, humiliation, and silent endurance. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, she would rise from the hard wooden floor where she slept on a thin mat, and her day would begin with labor that seemed to have no end. The cold wind of early morning would bite at her bare feet as she padded quietly to the kitchen, careful not to wake her stepmother, though she knew it hardly mattered. Even the faintest mistakes would be met with sharp words, or worse, a swift hand that left marks of anger and cruelty. Washing clothes was her heaviest and most frequent duty, a task that became a symbol of the endless labor imposed upon her. The river outside the village was cold, its waters cutting through her fingers as she scrubbed, rubbed, and rinsed the garments of her stepfamily. Her hands, small and delicate, were roughened and red from the constant friction, yet she worked silently, never allowing herself to complain. The stepmother would often stand behind her, watching with a smile that was anything but kind, offering instructions in tones that were sharp and filled with judgment. The stepsister, equally cruel though more careless, would giggle and toss her own wet clothes on the girl's back as if to make the work heavier, as if to remind her that she was insignificant, nothing but a servant in her own home. The girl's face, streaked with grime and flecked with droplets of water, never bore a frown long. She bore the weight of her labor with a quiet dignity that seemed almost unnatural to those who sought to break her spirit. From dawn to dusk, her chores left little room for rest. She would sweep the house, wash the floors, scrub the pots, fetch water, and attend to the animals if any. The endless work left her muscles aching and her hands raw, yet she endured each task as if it were a necessary ritual of survival. Villagers who passed by could see her bent over the river, her bare feet tangled among rocks and mud, yet few dared to speak or offer help. Her stepmother's reputation for cruelty ensured that even sympathetic neighbors stayed away, and so the girl's suffering remained largely invisible, confined to the corners of her home and the quiet whispers of the river. Despite her harsh surroundings, the orphan girl possessed a rare inner strength, a purity that seemed to radiate quietly through her actions. She never spoke ill of those who tormented her, and she never retaliated. Instead, she maintained a gentle kindness in the small gestures she could offer, straightening a crooked pot, humming a soft tune while she worked, or pausing to speak softly to the birds and the trees that grew near the riverbank. Her soul, though battered by circumstance, remained unbroken. In her quiet endurance, she cultivated a resilience that no whip, no harsh word, and no impossible chore could diminish. It was not only her labor that defined her days but also her constant vigilance and careful observation of the world around her. She noticed how the sunlight danced on the water, how the leaves swayed in the breeze, and how the small creatures of the river seemed to move in harmony with her presence. These observations, though subtle, reminded her that there was more to the world than the cruelty of her stepfamily. In her solitude, she drew strength from nature itself, finding solace in its beauty and rhythms. The orphan girl had learned that resilience was not merely enduring pain, it was finding fragments of joy and peace within the hardship. Her stepmother's cruelty was not limited to physical labor. She would often verbally belittle the girl, pointing out every flaw and mocking her plain appearance. The stepsister, mirroring her mother, would laugh and call the girl names, emphasizing her difference and making her feel as if she were nothing. Yet, the girl's response was not anger or rebellion. She responded with silence, with a quiet patience that perplexed those who sought to humiliate her. Her endurance became a form of resistance, a subtle defiance that demonstrated that no amount of cruelty could touch the core of her being. Even in moments when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, when her back ached and her hands bled, the girl pressed on. Each task completed, each garment washed, each corner of the house swept, became a testament to her willpower and determination. She understood, instinctively, that her labor was not only a requirement imposed by her cruel guardians but also a means to cultivate an inner strength that could not be measured by words or recognition. In the quiet of the dawn, as the mist lifted from the river and the village slowly awoke, she would pause for a moment, her hands in the water, feeling the pulse of life around her, and she would take a deep breath, steadying herself for another day of silent endurance. The orphan girl's daily struggle was thus more than physical, it was a test of spirit. It was a crucible in which her patience, kindness, and inner purity were forged. She became a living testament to the power of resilience, showing that even under the harshest conditions, one could maintain dignity, hope, and courage. Every chore completed, every step taken barefoot on the cold earth, every garment scrubbed and rinsed, was an act of silent heroism, unnoticed by many but marked by an invisible hand of grace. And though her life was filled with suffering, her spirit remained luminous, untouched by the bitterness that surrounded her, awaiting the moment when her quiet endurance would be recognized and blessed in ways beyond mortal comprehension. The orphan girl's life under her stepmother's roof was a relentless cycle of labor, humiliation, and silent endurance. Yet it was not merely the sheer volume of work that weighed upon her. It was the intentional cruelty, the calculated malice of her stepmother, that carved the deepest wounds. The stepmother's envy was a dark and simmering fire, born not only from the girl's youth and beauty but from the radiance of her spirit, qualities that shone despite the poverty and hardship of her life. Whereas her own daughter was showered with praise, fine clothing, and indulgence, the orphan girl was subjected to tasks designed to crush her, both physically and mentally. Each day, the stepmother would summon her with a sharp voice, demanding obedience before even allowing her to take breakfast. Every instruction carried an edge of ridicule, as if the very act of following an order was itself a test of the girl's worth. The stepmother's envy was never subtle. She would watch as villagers whispered praises of the girl's kindness, her diligent labor, and her graceful demeanor despite her hardships. These quiet compliments, small as they seemed, inflamed the stepmother's jealousy. It was one thing to have a daughter admired for beauty, but to witness an orphan, a child of no fortune, radiate virtue and earn the silent respect of the village, threatened the stepmother's sense of superiority. She took every opportunity to remind the girl of her position in the household, her lowly status, her ragged clothing, and the futility of her efforts. Even the smallest mistake would be magnified into a spectacle, forcing the girl to endure verbal lacerations meant to humiliate and degrade her. The tasks assigned by the stepmother were not ordinary chores. They were near impossible labors designed to exhaust the girl entirely. She would sweep the yard until her back ached, scrub laundry in cold water until her fingers were red and raw, and carry heavy buckets from the well as if her strength were a subject of mockery. Often, the stepmother would deliberately increase the difficulty, adding layers of humiliation, scattering additional dirt across the yard just after it had been swept clean, hiding her daughter's tools so she would fumble, or mocking her for resting too briefly between tasks. Each chore was not merely work, it was a trial, a test of patience, obedience, and silent endurance, with the cruel expectation that she would fail. Mockery was as essential to the stepmother's cruelty as the labor itself. She would stand at a distance, watching the girl toil, and make comments loud enough for passing neighbors to hear. "See how she struggles? Does she even know what work is?" she would say, a cruel smirk curling her lips. "Even the river laughs at her efforts, always failing, always weak." Her words were weapons designed to erode confidence, to convince the girl that her efforts were worthless and her strength imaginary. The stepsister, complicit in this cruelty, would mimic her mother's mockery, laughing when the girl dropped a bucket, tripped over a stone, or splashed icy water onto herself. Each jibe, each laughter-filled remark, was intended to shatter the girl's sense of self, to make her believe that she could never succeed, never rise above her station. Yet despite these constant attacks on her spirit, the orphan girl endured. She learned to work with quiet dignity, letting no complaint escape her lips. Her patience became a shield against the mockery, her resilience a quiet defiance. Even as her hands blistered and her bare feet grew sore from the river stones, she continued with unwavering focus. Every step, every scrub, every sweep was an assertion of her inner strength, though the stepmother was blind to it. This silent strength only seemed to fuel her tormentor's envy further. The more the girl endured, the more the stepmother sought to test her, to break her, to remind her of her supposed inferiority. It was within this context of relentless cruelty and envious scheming that the stepmother devised her most daunting challenge yet, the ice water task. She instructed the girl to wash mountains of laundry in the frigid river, insisting that the task must be completed before dawn. The river, swollen with winter runoff, was icy cold, biting at fingers and ankles alike. The stepmother imagined the girl's skin turning red and numb, her body shivering, and her spirit finally faltering under the cruel conditions. She believed that this trial would humiliate the girl before the entire household, proving once and for all that she was weak, unworthy, and subordinate. The stepmother's cruelty was not merely physical, it was psychological. She anticipated the girl's dread, her hesitation, her small signs of discomfort, and used them as fuel for mockery. Every shiver would be commented on, every tear dismissed as weakness, and every moment of pause regarded as an insult to the family's authority. Her cruelty was meticulous and deliberate, crafted to crush not only the girl's body but her very spirit, leaving her with nothing but fear and humiliation. Yet beneath the weight of this malice, the girl's purity and quiet courage shone undiminished. Each icy splash, each heavy burden, each mocking remark became a proving ground for her inner strength. Unseen by her tormentors, an unseen power stirred, a force that recognized her endurance, her patience, and her virtuous heart. The stepmother, confident in her triumph, could not foresee the subtle magic that would transform her cruelty into a stage for revelation and justice. The stage was set, bro. The ice water task was more than a punishment. It was a test that would not break her, but reveal the true depth of her strength and the extraordinary blessing that lay within her. Her quiet endurance had attracted forces beyond the mortal realm, forces that would soon overturn the cruelty of the household and demonstrate that virtue, even under the harshest conditions, cannot be subdued. The cold wind swept through the village as the stepmother's decree rang out, sharp and unyielding. "You will wash every last piece of clothing in the river before the sun rises," she commanded, her voice slicing through the morning air like a whip. The orphan girl, already weary from the endless chores and labors imposed upon her, looked at the river in the distance. It glistened under the pale moonlight, each ripple reflecting the harsh chill of the night. Her heart sank, knowing that the icy water would bite at her hands and feet, yet she did not speak a word of protest. Silence was her shield, endurance her only companion in the face of relentless cruelty. The villagers had long observed the girl's suffering from afar. They had watched as her stepmother devised new torments daily, each more cruel than the last. Many whispered amongst themselves, pitying her plight but fearing the wrath of the stepmother if they dared intervene. The family was feared, their house a place of rigid control and harsh punishment. To step forward would mean inviting the same suffering upon themselves. So they remained silent, their sympathy locked in private hearts while the girl's burden grew heavier with each passing day. Some offered quiet prayers from a distance, hoping the spirits or ancestors might shield her from harm, yet the steps of interference were too perilous to take. As the orphan girl approached the riverbank, her bare feet sank into the cold, damp earth, and a shiver ran through her body. The chill of the night air coupled with the icy water created a sharp, biting sensation that reached deep into her bones. Yet her determination remained steadfast. She had learned that complaint would earn her only ridicule and more torment. Each shiver, each sting from the freezing current, was endured silently. Her mind focused on the task, on the rhythm of scrubbing and rinsing, rather than the cold that sought to immobilize her. Every breath she drew was a quiet affirmation of strength, a refusal to let the cruelty of her stepmother dictate her spirit. The ice water bit into her fingers and wrists as she submerged the first piece of clothing. The fabric stiffened almost immediately, frozen to the touch, yet she worked with meticulous care, folding and rubbing the garments until every stain, every speck of dirt, was lifted. Her teeth chattered, and her skin turned red from the cold, but her resolve remained unbroken. She whispered soft prayers to the ancestors, asking for strength and protection. Though her body ached and her muscles screamed for respite, her inner determination burned brighter than any discomfort. Watching from the shadows, the villagers could hardly bear the sight. Some turned their faces away, unable to witness such suffering, while others clutched their hearts, feeling the injustice without the courage to act. The girl's silent endurance impressed them. There was a dignity in her labor that even the cruelty of her stepmother could not tarnish. Each splash of water, each careful scrub, was a testament to the purity of her spirit. Even in this moment of extreme hardship, she radiated a quiet strength that spoke louder than any words ever could. The stepmother, standing at the edge of the yard, sneered as she watched the girl struggle. Her eyes were sharp with anticipation, expecting to see the girl falter, expecting to witness a shiver or stumble that she could mock. Yet the orphan moved with an almost ethereal calm, her movements steady despite the freezing water and her aching limbs. She did not rush, nor did she allow frustration to break her focus. Each motion was deliberate, a reflection of her unwavering commitment to complete the task without complaint. Time seemed to stretch interminably as the girl worked through the long night. The moon traced slow arcs across the sky, and the cold deepened with each passing hour. Yet she pressed on, her resolve impervious to the physical torment that threatened to overwhelm her. The villagers watched, mesmerized by the endurance displayed before them. Some began to murmur among themselves, realizing that her strength was more than human. There was something almost divine in the way she endured suffering with such grace. The ice, meant to punish, became a backdrop against which her courage shone even brighter. Despite the chill that numbed her hands and the ache that throbbed in her joints, the girl moved with quiet determination. She reminded herself that this labor, however cruel, was hers to bear with dignity. Complaints would serve only to please her stepmother and her stepsister, to feed their jealousy and sense of superiority. Instead, she chose silence, endurance, and patience. Each completed piece of clothing was a small victory, a mark of her perseverance in the face of intentional cruelty. By the time the first rays of dawn began to touch the village, the orphan girl had finished the task. Her hands were raw, her fingers pruned from the icy water, and her feet bruised and red, but she stood tall, holding the neatly folded laundry with a quiet pride. The stepmother's expectation of humiliation had failed. The girl had endured the night without complaint, her dignity intact and her spirit unbroken. The villagers, who had watched in awe and fear, whispered among themselves about the extraordinary strength of this young girl. In that long, cold night, the orphan had not only completed the impossible task but had also demonstrated a deeper lesson: that cruelty, no matter how harsh, cannot diminish the heart of the pure. Her silent perseverance, witnessed by those too fearful to intervene, revealed a strength that was unassailable. Though the river had been ice, it could not freeze her spirit. Though her stepmother had sought to break her, the girl emerged unbowed. The ice water command, meant as a punishment, instead became a testament to her resilience. In every splashing wave, in every frozen droplet, there was a quiet triumph of virtue over cruelty, of inner strength over outward torment. The orphan girl, bathed in the cold waters and guided by her steadfast heart, had turned suffering into proof of her unyielding courage and purity of spirit. The moment her hands first broke the surface of the river, a piercing chill shot through her arms, racing like tiny shards of glass into every joint and bone. The water was icy, sharper than she had imagined, a shock that made her gasp involuntarily. Her fingers stiffened immediately, the skin turning pink, then red as the cold bit deeper. She had washed clothes in rivers before, endured cold mornings, but nothing like this. The river seemed alive with the sharpness of winter, intent on testing her very spirit. Yet she did not flinch, she did not pull back. Her heart steadied, and with a deep breath, she pressed on. Each garment she submerged pressed cold against her trembling hands. The cloth stiffened instantly in the water, refusing to bend easily, forcing her to scrub harder and longer than she had ever had to before. Her skin tingled with the numbing cold, her fingertips feeling as if they were no longer part of her body but foreign tools she had to manipulate. Pain pulsed through her hands with each squeeze and rub, the ice water a constant reminder of her stepmother's cruelty. Yet even as her muscles ached and her teeth chattered, a strange sense of determination filled her. She reminded herself silently that she must endure, that every garment washed was a testament to her resilience. The river around her seemed merciless at first. Tiny currents pressed against her wrists, cold enough to make her shiver from elbow to shoulder. The stones beneath the riverbed, slippery and jagged, threatened to trip her, yet she balanced carefully, bending with grace and precision as if guided by an unseen hand. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts, each inhalation clouding slightly in the icy air, but she continued her labor without complaint. The freezing water might have sought to numb her, to weaken her resolve, yet she found that with each deliberate movement, a quiet warmth bloomed deep inside her chest, a warmth of courage, of inner strength, and of quiet defiance. The villagers, watching silently from a distance, had never seen anyone endure such suffering without a single cry or complaint. Many hid behind trees or peered cautiously from windows, afraid of the stepmother's wrath should they be seen observing her. They whispered softly among themselves, voices hushed, marveling at her endurance. Some clutched charms or whispered prayers for her protection, sensing that this night, this river, and this cold held more than ordinary hardship. Something about the girl seemed to command the attention of the natural world itself, and even the wind that rustled through the nearby trees seemed to pause in reverence. As she continued her work, a subtle, almost imperceptible warmth began to radiate from her hands. It was faint at first, a gentle tingling that contradicted the icy sting of the river. She paused for a moment, holding a garment in the water, and noticed that where her fingers touched, the river seemed to ripple differently, almost softly, almost tenderly, as if yielding to her presence. The cold was still there, but the sting was less biting, less harsh. It was as though her determination, her inner purity, was beginning to interact with the very elements around her. Though she did not yet understand the magic stirring, she sensed it instinctively. The physical numbness and the shock of the ice remained, but now a rhythm formed. Her hands moved with a flowing, almost dance-like precision, dipping garments, scrubbing and wringing with steady patience. Each movement seemed to harmonize with the subtle warmth that blossomed in her palms, an unspoken signal that the river itself was responding. Though the water's surface remained crystalline and sharp, beneath it, a gentle current of change began to whisper, acknowledging the strength and purity of the girl who refused to yield. The icy touch traveled beyond her hands, threading into her wrists and forearms, yet she no longer felt entirely powerless against it. With every dip, every scrub, she imagined the cold being absorbed by her determination, leaving only her quiet warmth to flow into the water. Pain and discomfort persisted, but her mind rose above them, focused entirely on her work and on maintaining the dignity that no one at home had ever allowed her. Even as frost crept along the edges of her fingertips, her spirit burned steadily, a quiet fire in the face of elemental cruelty. By the time the first pieces of laundry had been washed, the girl could feel the faintest signs of something miraculous. The ice no longer bit as sharply, the cold lingered, but it was tempered by an unseen energy that seemed to bend the river to her will. Though she could not see it, a gentle warmth radiated around her hands, almost as if the river itself recognized her purity and perseverance. The village watchers, sensing this unexplainable calm, gasped softly. Many crossed themselves or bowed their heads, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. A moment when human resilience met the subtle magic of the world. Though her hands were still stiff and red, she smiled softly to herself, recognizing that endurance alone could not only withstand cruelty, it could transform it. The ice water challenge, intended to break her, instead illuminated her strength. Each garment washed in that freezing river became a silent testament. Even in the harshest trials, virtue and determination summon unseen protection, and even the coldest waters cannot extinguish the warmth of an unyielding spirit. The girl dipped her hands into the icy river again, the familiar sting of cold biting into her fingers. But this time, as she pressed the cloth beneath the surface, something astonishing happened. Where her hands touched the water, the ice seemed to tremble and a faint, gentle warmth began to ripple outward. It started as a subtle vibration, a softness that contrasted sharply with the biting chill surrounding it. At first, she thought it a trick of her imagination, the result of long hours of labor, but as she moved her hands across the wet fabric, the warmth followed, persistent and tangible. Her fingers moved carefully, wringing and scrubbing, and each time the cloth emerged from the water, it no longer carried the sting of ice. The river seemed to yield to her touch, obeying an invisible command that came not from force, but from her quiet strength. The current itself adjusted, flowing around her hands as though the waters had recognized the purity in her heart. It was a subtle miracle, one that grew in intensity with every piece of clothing she handled. The cold no longer dominated. The river bent to her will, offering warmth in exchange for her perseverance and kindness. The stepmother, who had been watching from the riverbank, froze as she noticed the change. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "No, this is impossible," she hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. She nudged her daughters, pointing at the shimmering water, but they could barely believe their own eyes. Even the oldest stepsister, who prided herself on rational thought, felt a chill of panic as the icy waters seemed to obey the girl instead of torment her. The river, which should have punished and humiliated, now appeared to protect and bless. Every splash of water sent gentle waves of warmth across the surface. Birds that had been startled by her work paused on the banks, watching intently. Fish swam closer, as if drawn by the unusual energy emanating from her hands. The warmth spread slowly, almost deliberately, a living, breathing force responding to her presence. The girl felt it radiating through her fingers, traveling up her wrists and into her shoulders, filling her with a sense of power that was neither violent nor aggressive, but calm, steady, and undeniable. She realized that her quiet acts of endurance and her unbroken kindness had awakened something ancient within the river itself. Her stepmother shook with rage and terror. "This cannot be," she exclaimed, her voice rising in panic. "She's just a child." Yet even as she spoke, the warmth flowed along the riverbank, lapping at her bare feet. The water did not harm her, but she recoiled instinctively, afraid of the girl's influence, which she could neither comprehend nor control. The stepsisters clutched each other, eyes wide with fear, as the simple act of washing clothes had transformed into a spectacle of wonder. The girl continued her labor, her movements deliberate and graceful. Each dip of her hands into the river extended the warm trail further, covering the entire area she worked within. The ice no longer bit, and even the flowing current carried a gentle, comforting heat. Her heart lifted, not out of pride but out of a deep recognition. The world itself could respond to virtue. Her small, quiet acts of diligence, her patience under cruelty, and the resilience she had maintained despite suffering were being acknowledged in a form she could feel and see. The villagers who had hidden nearby murmured in awe. They had come to witness the girl's punishment but now found themselves watching a miracle unfold before their very eyes. Mothers clutched their children, whispering prayers of thanks, and elders bowed their heads in solemn recognition. None of them could explain why the river obeyed her, but they understood that it was a force of justice and protection, awakened by her pure heart. The cold, harsh waters that had once threatened her now became a conduit of blessing, bending to honor her perseverance and innate goodness. The girl paused for a moment, hands hovering above the water, feeling the warmth radiate like sunlight through her veins. She realized that her suffering had never been meaningless. It had been a test, one she had passed not with force or anger, but with patience, courage, and kindness. Each garment that left the river was imbued with this miraculous warmth, a subtle reflection of the energy she had awakened. Even the moss along the riverbank seemed greener, the rocks less jagged, as though the natural world itself had shifted to accommodate and honor her. Her stepmother's fear escalated into desperation. She tried to shout, to command the girl to stop, but her words carried no authority in the presence of the unseen force now aligned with the girl's virtue. The stepsisters, pale and trembling, took a step back as the warm currents lapped closer to their feet. Even the smallest touch of the water felt different, as if the river were testing them, judging them, reminding them that cruelty could never control what was governed by purity and resilience. The girl's hands moved steadily, washing, wringing, and pressing the clothes, and the warmth followed, filling the river with a glow that was almost visible in the fading light. She felt neither pride nor arrogance, only a quiet serenity, an understanding that her suffering had been transformed into a tool of protection and a symbol of justice. The river responded not to anger, not to power, but to the gentle, unwavering force of her heart. And in that moment, all who watched knew something extraordinary had occurred. A simple, humble girl, faithful to kindness and courage, had awakened a magical force in nature itself. As the last of the clothes was lifted from the river, the warmth lingered, spreading along the banks like a blessing. The girl withdrew her hands, feeling the final traces of magic settle around her. The river returned to its normal flow, but the villagers, the stepmother, and the stepsisters would never forget what they had witnessed. The ice that had once sought to punish now bore the mark of her virtue, and the world had recognized the power of a pure and persevering heart. Word of the strange event by the river spread quickly through the village, carried first by the whispers of mothers watching from their doorways and then by the cautious voices of men returning from the fields. Villagers had long been aware of the girl's hardships, seeing her forced to carry out endless chores under the stepmother's cruelty. But none had ever imagined that such quiet suffering could awaken forces beyond human understanding. The river, which should have punished her with freezing currents, now flowed warmly wherever her hands touched it, a phenomenon that defied reason and filled the hearts of onlookers with a mixture of awe and fear. Those closest to the river approached cautiously, lingering at the edges to catch glimpses of the magical display without venturing too near. Mothers clutched their children protectively, whispering, "See, the river answers to her touch. Perhaps the ancestors favor her." Others, however, shivered with unease. "It cannot be good," one villager muttered. "Such power in a mere child, what does it mean for us?" Their minds wrestled with the implications. If the river could obey her, what else might the girl command in time? Could this blessing bring fortune, or would it invite danger upon the village? Curiosity drew more villagers toward the riverbank, yet fear tempered their steps. They observed her diligently washing the clothes, noting the calm determination on her face, the serenity in her posture, and the steady warmth radiating from the water. Every time her hands submerged in the icy current, the river seemed to bend to her will, radiating a glow that reflected not just in the water but upon her features. The girl appeared untouched by hardship, seemingly connected to forces greater than mere human cruelty. The sight stirred a profound mixture of admiration and trepidation in those who watched. In hushed tones, groups formed along the riverbank, mothers exchanging theories of divine favor, elders muttering of ancestral intervention, and young villagers whispering rumors of magical protection. "Perhaps she is chosen," one elder suggested, voice trembling with reverence. Another shook his head, caution shadowing his expression. "Chosen or not, such power is dangerous. We should be careful how we approach this." Each comment underscored the duality of human perception: awe at the miraculous, fear of the unknown. The stepmother and stepsisters, glaring from afar, could barely contain their shock. Their cruelty had always relied on fear and oppression, yet now they faced something beyond their understanding. The villagers' eyes, once obediently averted from the girl's suffering, now gleamed with curiosity and admiration. Even the most skeptical among them could not deny the river's change. It had become a living testament to the girl's resilience, courage, and purity. Whispers spread quickly, "The river bends for her, the ancestors smile upon her." Each word intensified the stepmother's envy and fear, while simultaneously validating the girl's quiet dignity. Children, innocent and perceptive, lingered at the edges, fascinated and emboldened. They watched her work with wide eyes, recognizing not just the magic in the water but the courage in her movements. The warmth that radiated from the river seemed almost tangible to them, inspiring a mixture of excitement and awe. Some whispered to their friends, imagining how it would feel to have the currents respond to their own hands. Others, more cautious, stepped back, sensing a power too vast for ordinary understanding. As the girl continued her labor, the villagers' whispers became a chorus, a blend of wonder and apprehension. They debated what it all meant. Was she protected by the spirits of the ancestors? Could her actions influence the world around her in ways previously thought impossible? Their minds wrestled with both hope and fear, admiration tempered by caution. Even those who had once scorned or ignored her began to regard her with newfound respect. The girl's quiet perseverance had shifted the balance of power in the village, altering perceptions of strength, virtue, and influence. Some elders, recognizing the potential significance, called for patience and observation. "Do not speak or act hastily," one advised. "What we see is a sign, a test perhaps. The girl is not merely enduring cruelty, she is transforming it into something extraordinary." Their words carried weight, and villagers listened, though some still struggled to suppress their unease. Fear lingered in the shadows of curiosity, for the unknown is never easily embraced. By the river's edge, the girl continued to work with steady hands, entirely absorbed in her task. The water responded as if aware of her presence, flowing with warmth, obedience, and subtle grace. The villagers' hearts, initially filled with mere curiosity, now bore respect tinged with cautious reverence. They realized that what they had once considered an ordinary child, powerless and oppressed, had become a vessel of virtue capable of awakening forces beyond their comprehension. The mixture of awe and fear painted the village with a new understanding. True power was not in cruelty or force, but in patience, kindness, and enduring resilience. By the time she completed the laundry, the villagers had learned something profound. They would speak of this day in whispers and stories, recounting how the river, which once punished, had become a conduit of blessing. They would speak of the girl's calm courage, of her hands that transformed ice into warmth, and of the subtle yet undeniable power that virtue commands. The lesson was clear to all. When cruelty is met with endurance and purity, the world itself bends to honor the righteous, leaving the fearful and envious to reckon with their own limitations. The moment the stepmother realized that the river no longer obeyed her whims, a cold wave of panic washed over her. She had always relied on fear, cunning, and cruelty to control the girl and assert her authority over the household. Every command, every punishment, every scolding had once been enough to bend the girl to her will. But now, standing at the riverbank, she witnessed a force she could not dominate. The water, once icy and relentless, now yielded warmth at the girl's touch, flowing gently as if acknowledging a law far beyond human influence. The stepmother's eyes widened in disbelief, her mouth opening and closing as if she had lost the power of speech. The stepmother tried to speak, to reclaim her control with words of command and threats. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice echoing across the river. "Do not touch the water. Obey me." But the river did not heed her. No matter how hard she stamped her feet, no matter how forcefully she gestured or how harshly she commanded, the currents remained docile, curling tenderly around the girl's hands. Every attempt to impose her will only highlighted her impotence, each gesture a stark reminder that cruelty could not compete with the quiet virtue of the girl. Her fury, once controlled and deliberate, now spiraled into chaotic desperation. Jealousy, always a familiar companion to the stepmother, twisted into an unfamiliar emotion, fear. She had always feared that the villagers might admire the girl, but she never imagined that nature itself would choose to intervene. The river, which had once been a mere obstacle in the girl's daily labor, now became a living testament to something she could neither dominate nor understand. Panic made her pulse quicken, her breathing shallow as she watched the girl continue her work, calm and unflinching, the warmth of the water radiating like a halo. Desperation clawed at the stepmother's mind. She tried to shame the girl with cruel words, to belittle her efforts in front of the villagers who had gathered to watch from a safe distance. "You are nothing but a common slave," she hissed. "You think you can command the river? It is not yours. It belongs to the ancestors, not to the likes of you." Yet her words fell flat, as if swallowed by the magic that infused the water. The girl's calm gaze, focused entirely on her labor, betrayed no fear, no resentment, only an unwavering resolve that deepened the stepmother's panic. The villagers, meanwhile, had begun to whisper among themselves, noting the strange behavior of the river. Mothers clutched their children, men murmured prayers, and even the elders, who were known for their skepticism, leaned forward with curiosity and awe. The stepmother could feel their eyes on her, their judgment implicit in every glance. She had relied on fear to command obedience, yet here, in the presence of an extraordinary event, her authority disintegrated like sand slipping through fingers. The magical defiance of nature against her cruelty left her exposed, small and powerless in a way she had never experienced before. Her hands trembled as she attempted more drastic measures. She moved closer to the girl, intending to shove her into the river, to remind both the girl and the onlookers of her dominance. But as she reached out, a branch from a nearby tree bent unexpectedly, forming a subtle barrier between her and the girl. The stepmother recoiled in shock, startled by the silent, protective force. Even the wind seemed to whisper warnings, rustling the leaves in a manner that felt alive. Every instinct she had honed for cruelty and manipulation failed her, replaced by a gnawing fear she could not quell. Her stepsisters, initially emboldened by the stepmother's confidence, now mirrored her panic. They shouted, tried to distract the girl, attempted to splash water toward her, and even threw stones, but all efforts were futile. Wherever their hands or objects reached, the water remained obedient to the girl's touch, deflecting aggression as if shielded by some unseen force. Their disbelief turned to terror, and their laughter and jeers evaporated into silence, replaced by a palpable tension that spread through the entire riverbank. The stepmother's mind raced, grappling with humiliation, fear, and anger. She considered retreat, fleeing from the scene to maintain some shred of dignity, yet pride would not allow her to depart without some display of authority. She stomped her feet, shouted threats, and attempted to reassert control with gestures of command, but the river's gentle warmth, guided by the girl's hands, defied every effort. Each act of defiance from nature against her cruelty deepened her panic, amplifying the realization that she was powerless to harm the girl or undo the blessings she had inadvertently invoked. Finally, the stepmother's voice cracked, her rage giving way to sheer desperation. Her commands became frantic, incoherent, and laced with hysteria. The villagers, who had been watching silently, felt the tension and awe blend into an almost sacred silence. The river, once cold and indifferent, now pulsed with warmth and life, a testament to the power of purity and virtue over cruelty. Even the stepmother, in her terror, could not deny it. She had been defeated not by force, but by the unyielding strength of a kind and steadfast heart. As the girl continued her task, unfazed and serene, the stepmother's panic reached its peak. Her jealousy had birthed fear, her cruelty had summoned humiliation, and her impotence had been laid bare by the gentle defiance of the natural world. The lesson was indelibly etched upon her. No amount of oppression, no torrent of envy, and no display of dominance could bend nature or the universe to the will of the wicked. In that moment, the villagers saw, and the stepmother realized, that true power resided not in fear, but in virtue, and that the universe itself would protect the innocent against cruelty. The morning had begun with a chill that bit at the fingers and numbed the toes, but by the time the sun climbed higher, the girl's hands had been working in the river for hours. Each garment, each fold of cloth, was scrubbed with meticulous care, her movements deliberate and patient despite the freezing water that should have sapped her strength. Yet as she dipped her hands again and again, something extraordinary began to unfold. The icy current that once threatened to bite and sting now yielded warmth wherever her fingers touched. It spread slowly at first, a tender, almost imperceptible glow that shimmered across the surface, and then more boldly, flowing over each piece of clothing, wrapping it in gentle heat. The girl paused for a moment, hands submerged, feeling the miraculous energy that seemed to respond to her perseverance and purity. Her lips curved into a quiet smile, not of triumph but of humble acknowledgement. She had endured cruelty, obeyed commands that were meant to break her spirit, and yet her resolve had not wavered. The river, it seemed, had recognized her unyielding heart and had answered her silent prayers with a blessing that was both protective and transformative. With each stroke, the garments grew softer, cleaner, and infused with the warmth of the river, as if absorbing the energy of her own steadfast endurance. The villagers, who had gathered at a safe distance, could no longer contain their astonishment. Mothers clutched their children and elders leaned forward, whispering to one another in awe. The warmth of the water spread like a ripple of wonder across their faces. Some trembled with disbelief, others with admiration, yet all were captivated by the sight of the girl, serene and unwavering, performing what seemed no ordinary task. The miracle was not only in the water but in the girl herself. Her calm demeanor, her quiet diligence, and her capacity to endure hardship without resentment radiated a power that drew every eye. The stepmother, standing a few paces behind her, felt a sinking chill of fear and dismay that no icy water could have rivaled. Every scheme, every act of cruelty had been meant to subjugate the girl, to humiliate her and display her inferiority before the villagers. And now that plan had backfired spectacularly. The river, once a tool for punishment, had become an instrument of revelation. Each piece of cloth, cleansed by the girl's hands, seemed to radiate a faint glow, reflecting not only the sunlight but also the resilience and purity of her spirit. The stepmother's face, once confident and harsh, twisted in a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and panic. Her stepsisters, who had stood by, initially mocking and laughing, now whispered among themselves, eyes wide with a dawning recognition that their cruelty had failed. Their sister's supposed weakness had become a channel for a force they could not control, and the realization of their own helplessness began to gnaw at their hearts. The girl's hands moved steadily, rhythmically, with an almost meditative grace. She felt no rush, no desire for recognition, only the quiet determination to finish what had been asked of her. In her endurance, the villagers saw a lesson unfold, that steadfast virtue and quiet resilience could command the very elements themselves. As the last garments were rinsed and wrung, the warmth of the river expanded fully across the surface. The water, once icy and threatening, now lapped gently at the riverbank, carrying with it a sense of calm and wonder. The villagers gasped collectively, their whispers turning into murmurs of admiration. Some of the elders raised their hands in blessing, acknowledging the girl's remarkable endurance and the miraculous transformation of the river. Children stared with wide eyes, pointing at her hands as they continued to emit a warmth that was both literal and symbolic. The stepmother's heart pounded, a mixture of fury and fear that no anger could dispel. She had intended to break the girl, to impose suffering and humiliation, and yet here she stood, undone by her own devices. The girl's calm determination, combined with her inner purity, had rendered the cruelty powerless. The stepmother's attempts at authority now seemed fragile and meaningless against the sheer force of virtue the girl displayed. The villagers, sensing this, turned their admiration fully toward the girl, leaving the stepmother isolated in her failure. In that moment, the girl finished the final ring of the last garment, lifting it carefully from the river to hang upon the line. The fabric, cleansed and warmed, shimmered subtly in the sunlight, a visible testament to her perseverance and the magic that had been awakened by her virtue. Villagers approached cautiously, offering words of awe and encouragement, praising her courage and resilience. Their voices carried through the air, affirming that suffering endured with dignity could command respect and even invoke the blessings of forces beyond human understanding. The stepmother's panic had reached its zenith. She attempted to issue a command to reclaim control through shouts and gestures, but the villagers ignored her. The girl, calm and composed, had completed the task, and the river itself had sided with her. There was no argument, no counterforce, no way for cruelty to regain its dominance. It was a quiet, undeniable lesson etched into the very waters of the river, that virtue, resilience, and inner purity would always outshine malice, fear, and envy. Finally, as the girl gathered her washed garments and prepared to return home, the villagers could not help but marvel at her. They had witnessed a simple task, washing clothes, transformed into a demonstration of extraordinary courage and mystical blessing. The stepmother's plan had collapsed entirely, leaving her and her daughters in shame, while the girl's quiet endurance had earned her not only admiration but a permanent place in the hearts of all who watched. In that moment it was clear, no act of cruelty could prevail against steadfast goodness, and even the simplest labor, performed with purity and perseverance, could reveal the extraordinary. As seasons changed and years passed, the story of the girl who had washed clothes in icy waters and transformed the river with the warmth of her hands began to travel far beyond the village. Mothers and fathers would gather their children around evening fires and recount her tale, not as a mere anecdote of magical wonder, but as a lesson of endurance, kindness, and moral strength. Every word was carefully chosen to convey that suffering endured with patience and purity of heart could summon blessings far greater than wealth, power, or human favoritism. Her tale quickly became a touchstone for villagers, a story repeated in whispers and proclamations alike, meant to inspire courage and virtue in those who faced adversity. Hands that endure with a pure heart can turn cold into warmth, they would say, emphasizing not the magical river itself, but the strength and goodness that lay within the girl. Every retelling highlighted the contrast between her compassion and the cruelty of her stepmother and stepsisters. The tale made clear that malice, no matter how forceful or prolonged, ultimately failed against the power of moral resilience. The stepmother, who had intended to humiliate and break the girl, instead became a cautionary example of envy and injustice. Her schemes and harshness only served to highlight the girl's extraordinary virtue. Through this story, the villagers came to understand that cruelty is self-defeating, while steadfast goodness grows stronger in the face of adversity. The story also became a celebration of the subtle magic inherent in acts of kindness. Villagers spoke of the river not as an object of wonder alone, but as a living testament to the principle that pure intentions and selfless endurance can affect the world around them. Children were taught that no hardship, no icy water, no burden too heavy, could harm a heart that remained honest, brave, and kind. Parents instructed their sons and daughters to emulate her calm courage, to persevere when faced with cruelty, and to act with compassion even toward those who sought to harm them. This was more than folklore, it was a living lesson woven into the fabric of communal life. Merchants and travelers carried the story to distant villages, retelling the events with reverence. In each place it was told, the legend took root, adapting slightly to the environment but keeping the central truth intact, that patience, kindness, and resilience transform suffering into blessing. Some spoke of her as a miraculous figure, half human, half touched by ancestral spirits. Others recounted her actions as exemplary human virtue, a tangible reminder that purity of heart could influence the world in ways ordinary strength or cunning could not. In every retelling, her hands, once ordinary and small, became symbols of transformative power, capable of warming icy waters, inspiring awe, and demonstrating the profound impact of moral integrity. Artists and storytellers, inspired by her deeds, began to depict her in carvings, drawings, and songs. Images of her kneeling by the river, her hands glowing softly as the water turned warm, became common motifs in village halls and temples. The songs recounted her endurance, her humble labor, and the magical blessing that had followed her hands. Each artistic representation reminded the audience that the source of her miracle was not mere luck or supernatural favor alone, but the unshakable goodness within her. The folklore thus served both as a celebration and as a moral compass, illustrating that human virtue could channel divine or natural forces in remarkable ways. Elders often concluded the story with a moral reflection: cruelty achieves nothing but its own downfall, while patience, virtue, and courage ripple outward to create blessings far beyond the initial act. Villagers would nod knowingly, understanding that the story of the girl and the warmed river was a mirror for their own actions and choices. If they acted with jealousy, anger, or envy, they risked invoking the same self-defeating forces as the stepmother. If they chose patience, resilience, and kindness, they could influence not only their immediate surroundings but also the lives of others, creating harmony and respect that extended beyond themselves. The legend became part of daily life. Teachers used it to instruct children, elders recited it to instill values, and young people carried it into their own homes as a guide for behavior. Over time, her name became synonymous with moral integrity and spiritual courage. To this day, villagers, both near and far, invoke her story when faced with injustice or hardship, reminding themselves that true strength lies not in retaliation, wealth, or power, but in maintaining purity of heart, compassion for others, and steadfast perseverance in the face of adversity. Her hands, once small and unassuming, are remembered as the hands that changed the course of suffering into a blessing for all who witnessed or learned of her story. In essence, the girl's legacy transcends generations. She becomes eternal in memory, a beacon of virtue that outshines cruelty and hardship. The river she touched and the warmth she brought into it are symbols that endure in folk sayings, songs, and stories, reminding all that goodness is a force of nature in its own right. Her tale teaches that those who act with malice only harm themselves, while those who endure with integrity and compassion create miracles both small and great. Through this, she remains a symbol of purity, resilience, and harmony with the world, a living lesson that continues to inspire and guide generation after generation.